So the applause is always good because our praise team does such a good job. Thank you to Pastor Kyle. Thank you to all the musicians who lead us so well in worship every weekend. And while we're at it, the reason that we can actually hear the music is because of the folks in the back. And so I want to say thank you to Phil Holy, who's serving as our interim tech director. Also want to say hi to Thomas Drawn. He's running sound for us this morning. And so thank you guys so much for all the work that you do. So for this morning's message, let's start here. She loves me. She loves me not. She loves me. She loves me not. That's a lot of petals on that flower. How long do you think it's going to take me to get to the end of that flower? So let me ask you a question. Anybody ever done this before? I know it's silly and superstitious, but anybody ever done this before? Anybody ever counted the petals on the flower before you started to make it turn out the way you wanted to? Because nothing says romance like rigging the system, right? I know it's kind of a silly exercise, and yet a lot of people do it. And here's the reason they do it. It may be a silly exercise, but this silly exercise is meant to answer a pretty profound question. And here's the question. How can I know and how can I see that there is actually somebody out there who really, truly, deeply, sincerely loves me? Because there is something in the human heart that cries out to be loved. Everybody needs to be loved by somebody. So this week in Zion, we are wrapping up a series that we have been in all summer long on the Old Testament book of Leviticus. And I've been saying this all summer long. If you've ever tried to read through the book of Leviticus before, one of the things that you may have struggled with is when you start reading the book, it kind of reads like an endless list of rules and regulations and stipulations. And these rules and regulations and stipulations were written to a people a long, long time ago, the ancient nation of Israel, in a place that was far, far, far away in the ancient Near East. And so you read all of this stuff, and you kind of wonder, what does any of this have to do with me in the 21st century? And that's part of the reason that we're doing this series, because one of the things that we're trying to see in this series is that the book of Leviticus is far more, and it goes far deeper than just an endless list of rules and regulations and legislation. The book of Leviticus is actually a collection of divine revelation. It is wisdom from God that can still speak to people like you and like me in the 21st century. And so today, as we get to the end of our series, as we wrap up the book of Leviticus, the book of Leviticus actually wraps up itself with a very deep, very profound, and very important question. And here's the very deep, very profound, and very important question that the book of Leviticus wraps up with. How can I know and how can I see that there is somebody out there who really, truly, sincerely loves me? That is actually the question that comes to us at the end of the book of Leviticus, except at the end of the book of Leviticus, the stakes on that question get raised. Because the end of the book of Leviticus doesn't just ask that question about anybody. The end of the book of Leviticus asks that question about somebody specifically. It actually asks that question about God. Here's the question we wrestle with at the end of the book. How can I know and how can I see that there is a God out there who really, truly, sincerely, and actually loves me? Because just like everybody needs to be loved by somebody, there is something in the human heart. There is a yearning in the human spirit that cries out to be loved by God. And the book of Leviticus is going to help us see God's love. Now, the way the book of Leviticus kind of helps us see God's love is through something that is called a covenant. Now, a covenant is a word that we use in church, but we don't really use it anywhere else. And so let me begin just by doing a little bit of technical etymological work here with you. The word covenant, from an old Latin word, convenire, which means to come together. And that's basically what a covenant is. It is when two parties or two people come together and they come to an agreement on something. Now, whether or not you know it, you actually enter into covenants all the time. In fact, if you've ever bought like a new car off a car dealer's lot, you entered into a covenant with that car dealer. Because what happens when you go onto a car dealer lot? They have a list price that they want you to pay. You also have a price that you want you to pay. And those two prices do not match up most of the time. And so what do? You go back and forth, you haggle, till you come together and you agree together on the price that you want to pay for that vehicle. And that is the beginning of a covenant that you enter into with that car dealership. Now, once you figure out what price you're going to pay, the next stage of the covenant that you enter into with the car dealership comes with what I like to call terms and conditions. You know what those are, right? That's all the fine print of the covenant. And so it's not just what price you're going to pay, it's how you're going to pay it. Are you going to pay in cash or are you going to use financing? And by the way, if you're going to use financing, are you going to use third-party financing or are you going to use dealer financing? And oh, by the way, are you going to get the regular warranty or are you going to purchase the extended warranty? And how many of those dealer doc fees are you really willing to pay? You got to go back and forth on all of that too. And finally, when you come to an agreement on all of that, the covenant gets completed. The covenant gets finished because you have come together and you have agreed together with a dealer on the price that you want to pay for the car, and so they get your money and you get their car. It's a covenant. Now, just like in the 21st century, when we enter into a covenant, we come to an agreement with all sorts of terms and conditions. In the 15th century BC, when people back then entered into a covenant, they would come to an agreement too, that also had terms and conditions too. And at the end of the book of Leviticus, we read about one of those covenants, and it's between two parties. It's between God himself and the ancient people of Israel. And what I want to do this morning is I just want to walk through and work through this covenant from the end of the book of Leviticus. And specifically, I want to walk through and work through the terms and conditions that come with this covenant at the end of the book of Leviticus. And so, here's the covenant that the book of Leviticus closes with, Leviticus 26, verse 3. God is speaking here to the people of Israel, and here's what he says. He says, if you follow me, if you follow my decrees, and are careful to obey all my commands. And by the way, the decrees and the commands here are the decrees and the commands that we've read about heretofore in the book of Leviticus. And so, God says you need to follow all of my decrees. Like all those sacrificial decrees, those are sacrifices you need to make. You need to follow my commands. Like all of my moral code, those are things you need to follow. And if you do that, then God says, I'm going to send you rain on your land in its season. In other words, your land is never going to experience a drought. And the ground is going to yield its crops, and the trees are going to bear their fruit. In other words, you're never going to have a famine. In fact, you're going to have so much food that the threshing will continue until the grape harvest. Now, the threshing would happen at the beginning of the summer, when you would separate grain from its stalk. The grape harvest would happen at the end of the summer. And so God says you're going to have so much food that one harvest is going to bleed right into another harvest. And the grape harvest is going to continue until the planting. And the planting here would have been the winter wheat in the fall. And you, God says, are going to eat all the food you want. And so God says, if you obey my decrees and my commands, you're going to have so much food that really the only problem you're going to have is a weight problem. Because after you eat all this food, you're going to have to loosen your belts a couple of notches. Not only that, God says, but I'm going to grant you peace in your land. You're going to lie down. And nobody is going to make you afraid. In other words, in your land, there's not going to be a single bad neighborhood. Nobody's going to have to put an alarm system on their house. Nobody's going to have to put bars on their windows. Nobody's going to have to keep a gun on their nightstand. Everything is going to be safe and secure. The sword, God says, is not going to pass through your country. You're going to pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. And your army is going to be amazing because 5 of your army will be able to chase 100 of your enemy. And 100 of your army will be able to chase 10,000 of your enemy. I'm going to look on you with favor, And I'm going to make you fruitful, not just in crops, but I'm going to increase your numbers. Your population is going to grow. Your GDP is going to be all up and to the right. And all of this will be a sign and a symbol that I have kept my covenant with you, and I do not abhor you. Instead, God says, I love you. This is the covenant, God says. These are the terms and conditions of the covenant that I want to make with you. If you follow me, and if you do good at following me, I will be good to you and I will bless you in ways that you cannot even imagine. In fact, this is how you're going to know, and this is how you're going to see, God says, that I am a God who loves you. All you're going to have to do is just look at the circumstances around you. This is how you can know God's love according to Leviticus 26. Just look at your circumstances. If your circumstances are blessed, then you are good with God. If you got grain in your barns and fruit on your tree, if you have a really strong and powerful army, if your GDP is up and to the right and your population continues to grow, then God says, this is how you will know that I love you. Just look at my blessings. So, those are the terms and conditions of the covenant in Leviticus 26. That is how we can know that God loves us, according to Leviticus 26. So, you know how this works, right? Whenever you download like an app on your phone, it always has the terms and conditions, and you scroll, and then at the bottom it has a little box you check to accept the terms and conditions of the covenant on your phone. Who's ready to check the box and accept those terms and conditions? Anybody? I mean, they're pretty good terms and conditions, right? Obey God, be good, and get good stuff. Now, as you're thinking about that, I should probably tell you something. Those aren't all the terms and conditions of this covenant. Did you know that? The terms and conditions in Leviticus 26 actually continue. And so just in the interest of full disclosure, let me read some more of the terms and conditions to you. Because God continues. Leviticus 26, verse 14, he says, Now, if you don't listen to me, and if you don't carry out all these commands, and if you reject my decrees and you abhor my laws and you violate my covenant, then we're going to have a problem. Because then I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to bring on you sudden terror. I'm going to bring on you wasting diseases and fever. You're going to spend all your time in the ICU, God says, and that will destroy your sight and sap your strength. You're going to plant in vain. Yes, your crops will grow, but then your enemies will eat all your crops. Not only that, those who hate you will rule over you, and your army is going to be a bunch of wusses. They're going to be so paranoid that they're going to flee even when no one is pursuing them. And so here's the other side of the terms and conditions of this covenant. God says in the first part of the terms and conditions, if you do good, then I'll be good to you. But let me warn you, God says, if you do bad, if you break my commands, then you're going to get bad stuff from me. Because if you do bad, you're going to make me mad, so watch out, God says. Those are all the terms and conditions of the covenant. So I should probably ask you again, anybody ready to check the box and sign up for the terms and conditions of that covenant now? Anybody? So I was thinking about this. The terms and conditions of the covenant in Leviticus 26 are 46 verses. There are a lot of terms and conditions in this covenant, but really all the terms and conditions in the covenant can be summed up in just 4 words, and here are the 4 words. God says to his people, if you, then I. That's like the whole terms and conditions. And we see this just in the way that the terms and conditions are outlined. Leviticus 26, verse 3, God says, now, if you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, then I'm going to give you all sorts of good stuff and all sorts of blessings. But in verse 14, if you will not listen to me and carry out all these commands, then I am going to give you all sorts of bad stuff. And your life is going to turn into a disaster. Here are the terms and conditions summarized in just 4 words. If you, then I. Now, here's the thing. We actually don't need the covenants in Leviticus 26 to operate under these terms and conditions. Because these terms and conditions aren't just covenantal, they're actually defaults. This is the way that human beings assume that God wants to work with them. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say this to you. This is the way that you assume that God wants to work with you. Let me give you an example. You ever tried to make a bargain with God before? If you did, what did you say to God? God, if you, there are the terms and conditions. If you just give me this job that I really, really want, then I promise I'll be more generous. I'll even tithe to church. What are the terms and conditions? If you, then I. God, if you just give me that girl that I really want to date, or that guy that I really want to marry, then I promise I'll be a good guy or a good gal, a good husband, a good wife. What are the terms and conditions? If you, then I. These are the default terms and conditions of the human heart. But there's a problem with these terms and conditions, and here's the problem. Sometimes these terms and conditions don't always work out. You ever noticed that before? Where like you say to God, God, I promise I'm going to do something really good. I just want you to give me something really good, and then he doesn't. God, if you just bring me this girl or this guy, then I promise to be a really good girl or a really good guy. And you even are preemptively a really good girl or a really good guy, but you still don't get the person you want to date. And so you go to God and you say to God, God, what happened to the terms and conditions? I thought we had an agreement here. God, if you just give me that job, then I promise I'll be really generous and I'll start tithing to the church. And just to kind of grease the wheels, you start tithing to the church even before you get the job, but then you don't get the job. And you go to God and you say to God, God, what happened to the terms and conditions? I thought we had an agreement here. The problem with the terms and conditions of Leviticus 26 is that sometimes they don't work out. Sometimes they fall completely flat. So, let me ask you again. You want to check the box to accept the terms and conditions of that covenant? Anybody? So, let me give you a little free advice, okay? Give you a little free advice. I wouldn't check the box. Let me give you 2 reasons why, okay? 2 reasons. First reason. The covenant in Leviticus 26 is a perfectly good covenant. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a covenant that was dreamed up and designed by God. That makes it a good covenant just by default. But here's what you need to know. A covenant is an agreement between 2 parties. And you're not the second party in this covenant. This covenant is a good covenant, but it's not a covenant that was actually designed for you. And we see this explicitly at the end of the covenant. Leviticus 26, verse 46 tells us the 2 parties in this covenant. These are the decrees, the laws, and the regulations, all of the terms and conditions that the Lord established between himself and who? The Israelites. Real quick question for you. Are you an ancient Israelite, yes or no? No. Which means this covenant was not designed for you. Now, this leads me to the second reason I'm not quite so sure you should try to check the box on the terms and conditions of that covenant. Here's the second reason. I think you can do better. And I'll show you why I think that in just a second. I believe that there is a better covenant on offer. And I'll show you why I believe that in just a second. But let's start here. So 1,500 years after this covenant in Leviticus 26 was given, there was a sermon, I've talked about this before, that was preached in the first century on the book of Leviticus. And the sermon was so profound, it was so deep, it was so insightful, that it actually got recorded, it got transcribed, and it got inserted into the pages of our New Testament as the book of Hebrews. Now, part of the reason this sermon is called the book of Hebrews is because of who this sermon was preached to. It was preached to a group of Hebrews or Jews, descendants of the ancient Israelites in Leviticus 26. And you need to know this about this group of Hebrews. This group of Hebrews knew the covenant in Leviticus 26 like the backs of their hands. In fact, a lot of them had all the terms and conditions memorized. But they encountered the same tension that so many people encounter when they try to live by the terms and conditions of this covenant. Sometimes it seems like the terms and conditions don't work out because the terms and conditions say if you do good, God will do good to you. If you do bad, then God will be mad at you and something bad is going to happen to you. But there were lots of people, lots of Hebrews in the first century who would try to do good. And you know what happened? They still got stuff that was bad. And so they were left wondering, why didn't the terms and conditions work out for me? And what the preacher of Hebrews does in the middle of his sermon is he addresses this tension that is inherent in this covenant head on. Here's what he says about this tension. Hebrews 11 verse 33. He says, there were some people who followed the terms and conditions of the old covenant, and it worked out great. They conquered kingdoms. They administered justice. They gained what was promised in the covenant in Leviticus 26. In fact, they gained more than what was promised in the covenant in Leviticus 26. They were able to shut the mouths of lions. That was never mentioned in Leviticus 26, but they were able to do it. They were able to quench the fury of the flames. That was never mentioned in Leviticus 26, but they were able to do it. They were able to escape the edge of the sword, just like Leviticus 26 says. Their weakness was turned into strength. 5 of them could chase off 100 of an enemy. 100 of them could chase off 10,000 of an enemy. They became powerful in battle. They routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were some people who followed what Leviticus 26 said. They did good, and here's what happened. They got good. It all worked out. But there was a problem. Because you see, the preacher of Hebrews continues, there were others. Let me tell you about these others. They were tortured. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins. They didn't even have a proper wardrobe because they were so destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And then just so we do not get the wrong idea here, the preacher of Hebrews says this. You need to know something about these people. These people were really, really good. I mean, they worked so hard to follow all of God's decrees and obey all of God's commands. In fact, they were so good that the world wasn't even worthy of them. And yet none of them got the good stuff in the covenant. None of them received what was promised. The worst possible things, the preacher of Hebrews says, happened to the best possible people. And they were left with a question that all of us ask when bad things happen to good people. And the question is what? Why? Why? I mean, I tried so hard, and yet it didn't work out. Why? Now, the preacher of Hebrews, he attacks this question head on, because here's what he says next. He says, this is why. Verse 40. It's because God had planned something that was better. You see, the covenant in Leviticus 26, with its terms and conditions, it's great. But God has a covenant that's even better than that one. And here's the really good news about this covenant. Here's my favorite two words in Hebrews 11. It is a covenant that is better for who? Not just for ancient Israel, but for us. This isn't just their covenant. This is our covenant. And this covenant is so good that only together with us would the people who follow the old covenant actually have everything work out, actually be made perfect. In fact, here's how good this covenant is. Everybody's looking, and everybody's waiting, and everybody's watching to see how this covenant is going to work out with people like you and like me. Which is why in Hebrews 12, verse 1, the preacher of Hebrews says, because we have this covenant, we're surrounded by like this great cloud of witnesses. Everybody's wondering and watching. Is this covenant going to work better than the last covenant? And the preacher of Hebrews gives us a word of encouragement when he says, listen, this covenant is going to work out. It's going to work out great. It's going to work out so well that here's what you need to do. You need to throw off everything that hinders you. Don't let anything keep you from this covenant. Here's what else you need to do. You need to throw off the sin that so easily entangles. Because here's what sin will do when you fall into it. It will whisper in your ear, because you've done bad, God is mad, and you're not worthy of this new covenant. When sin does that, that's a trap. Sin is trying to hurt you. It's trying to entangle you. So don't listen to it. Here's what you do. You just keep on running with perseverance. You keep going on the race that is marked out for you. Because when you run this race, here's what you're going to find at the end of the race. Here's what you are going to discover, a brand new covenant. And this new covenant has a great name. You know what his name is? Jesus. That's the new covenant. He's the new covenant. In fact, these words in yellow are so important, I want us to read them all together. You guys ready? Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Here's the reason these words are so important. Those words actually give us the answer to our question. How can I know and how can I see that there is a God out there who really, truly, ultimately, deeply, sincerely loves me? Under the terms and conditions of the old covenant, here's how you could know and here's how you could see that there was a God out there who really, truly loved you. You just looked at your circumstances. And if your circumstances were good, God was glad. If your circumstances were bad, God was mad. But under the terms and conditions of the new covenant, you don't look at your circumstances. The only way that you can know that there is a God out there who really, truly, sincerely loves you is simply by looking at Jesus. Which is why the preacher of Hebrews says, fix your eyes on him. Nothing else. Here's the reason this is so important. Maybe you're in the smooth sailing section of your circumstances in life right now. I mean, everything is going great. Your kids are all dating people you really, really like. And they're going to college and they're killing it, man. They're going to be out not in 4 years, but in 3 years, which means you're going to get that mom or dad discount, right? And you just got the bonus at work, and your lawn is beautiful and green, even at the beginning of August in Central Texas. Yeah. It's the smooth sailing section of your circumstances, but maybe you're in the rough seas section of your circumstances. Your lawn is dead. And by the way, your career is dead because you just got laid off. And your kids, yeah, they're not doing so well. Your kids, are not only not completing college, they don't even want to go to college, which is fine, but they don't really want to do anything. Your marriage is on the rocks. Your relationships have broken down. Here's what the new covenant would tell you. If you want to know whether or not God is there, if you want to know whether or not he has any care, if you want to know whether or not he loves you, you can't look at all of that. The only way to know that God really, truly loves you is just to look at Jesus and what he's done for you. Which is why, back to Hebrews 12, verse 2, the preacher of Hebrews continues by saying, here's what Jesus has done for you. He's endured the cross. He's scorned its shame. And he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's how you know that God loves you. The terms and conditions of the covenant in Leviticus 26, the old covenant, are summed up in these 4 words. God says, if you, then I. If you do good, then I'll do good to you. If you do bad, then there's punishment waiting for you. The terms and conditions of the new covenant are different because here's what God says in the terms and conditions of the new covenant. If I, then I. If I, God says, do not spare my own son, and if I, God says, give him up for you and give him to you, and if I, God says, allow him to endure the cross, and if I, God says, allow him to bear the world's shame, and if I, God says, pull him to my right side where he is seated right now, then I most certainly love you. There's no doubt about it. Now, look up there. And you tell me. Which terms and conditions look better to you? Here's kind of the best way I know how to explain it, okay? So for the first 28 years of my life, I was under a covenant, okay? And this was the covenant of singleness. Now, here's what you need to know about the covenant of singleness. It's a good covenant. In fact, one of the things that I kind of regret about the church over so many years is that somehow and sometimes the church is not treated like the covenant of singleness, like it's a good and holy and noble covenant. And let me assure you, it is. And just like any covenant, right, it comes with some terms and conditions. There are some challenges, right? Sometimes you encounter the challenge of loneliness. Sometimes you encounter the challenge of chastity or purity. But the terms and conditions of the covenant come with amazing blessings, right? You have some freedom. You have some bandwidth to do some things to serve the church that you don't always have when you have a family and a mortgage and a car payment and all of that stuff, right? There are some blessings in the covenant of singleness. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, if you are part of that covenant, that's awesome. I was part of that covenant for 28 years. That covenant was good. But then one day, I met this girl. Her name was Melody. And here's what I discovered. I had actually said that I was going to be single my whole life because the covenant of singleness was good. My problem was that Melody was cute. Which is why on July 4th, 2006, I got down on one knee. And I asked the woman who is now my wife to marry me. And when I did, I gave her all the terms and conditions. Here were the terms and conditions. Please, 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 I'll do anything, just don't say no. Those were the terms and conditions. After almost 20 years of marriage, she's kind of wishing she would have renegotiated those terms and conditions. Now, here's what I've discovered. This is just for me. It may not be for you, but it is for me. The terms and conditions of singleness, that's a gift from God. It's a good covenant. But the terms and conditions of my marriage, they're even better. You know why? Because everybody needs to be loved by somebody. And I'm so glad that I have somebody who loves me. Now, for me, that's just kind of a personal thing. But here's what I want you to know, because this is true for all of us. The terms and conditions of the covenant in Leviticus 26, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're given by God. But I know this for you. The terms and conditions of the covenant that was brought in by Jesus, those are even better. Because everybody needs to be loved by somebody, and the terms and conditions of the new covenant tell you again and again and again that God loves you. How do you know? Just by fixing your eyes on Jesus. Let's read this together from Hebrews 7, verse 22. Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Here's how good the covenant is. When you sin, Jesus says, I love you. When you fall, Jesus says, I love you. When you doubt, Jesus says, I love you. In the new covenant, every petal ends the same. And that's the covenant that has been given to you in Jesus' name. So, if you're gonna check the box for some terms and conditions of a covenant, check the box for the terms and conditions of that covenant. Okay? Let's stand and pray.